deal of issues that the technology community had with it, not least because it made Wi-Fi an issue in terms of how people shared Wi-Fi, but whether or not libraries would be liable for file sharing over their networks, and that's still a big issue. But it's gone through, and the government has effectively said that as far as we know, is that it's going to continue to stay. Perhaps the MPs in the room could basically talk about whether or not they think that that Act is going to affect the economy in the UK adversely, whether or not perhaps you think that it may just sort of fade away almost as an issue. But there's certainly still issues in terms of how people share networks, and also the impact on businesses in terms of having to filter their networks for file sharing ISPs, the cost to ISPs, and then of course how that's passed on to consumers. Go ahead.
Well, you've nicely summarised the answer, in fact, there. I thought that was a very thorough question. I mean, firstly, it's worth saying that there's a lot to the Digital Economy Act. It's not just the bits that many of us hate. There are some other bits there which are vaguely all right. But there's a few clauses which are a real problem. And they're a real problem principally because they hit consumers. And the problem is the whole system forgets the fact, or the way it was rushed through, forgets the fact that yes, there are businesses, but there are also consumers. And if you tell consumers that you don't really want to deal with them, they're going to go away and do something else. No sensible business would start off by fighting with its potential customers. What's going to happen with it? I mean, there's a whole lot of parliamentary stages. There's some slight prospect of something coming up through the Freedom Bill, which is supposed to free us from all sorts of things. I hear differing stories about whether there's going to be some relaxation in that. The latest I've heard is there probably won't be, but there'll be an opportunity for David and I and others to see what we can do about that, and actually at least have a chance for a proper debate. Because one of the worst things about the Digital Economy Act was the fact that it really wasn't discussed. I don't know if you happened to tune in that evening when we had, I think there was a 2-hour debate on the Digital Economy Act, Digital Economy Bill. It was about 2 hours in the House of Commons, and that actually isn't enough to get through the details of a fairly complex piece of legislation. I think it will be there. I think it will be damaging overall for the digital economy. It's about keeping the broader digital economy in the past rather than looking for newer business models. It will cause problems for Wi-Fi, it will cause problems for ISPs, but I think particularly it causes problems for consumers and how involved they want to be.
David?
Yeah, I can't add much to what Julian said. I mean, firstly, the reason the Act has got its problems, not all of it's a problem, but it's got its problems, is because it was a classical case of producer capture from day one. And people, can you hear me? No. People built in the various producer interests, built into it defences for themselves. And they built them in ways which are guaranteed, it won't fade away, are guaranteed to create problems because there will be injustices. And injustices are what feed newspaper headlines. So it will not stay as it is in the long run, whatever happens immediately in Parliament. Secondly, in terms of the actual bill itself, as Julian said, it went through what's called a wash-up procedure. Don't worry about the technicality. It means this enormous bill went through in 2 or 3 hours on the nod. And it went through, I think, on the nod to some extent because political parties didn't want to offend those same producer interests, who are quite powerful. So that's how we got to where we are now. It's a very bad piece of law in some respects. I spoke to Nick Clegg when he was first canvassing for thoughts for the Freedom Bill, and at that point Nick was incredibly enthusiastic and said, well, what about the Digital Economy Bill? And as Julian says, since then things have faded a bit. But this Freedom Bill that's going through will be a very big, very wide bill and be very capable of having pieces put into it to amend the Digital Economy Bill. Maybe we'll talk about it, how we do it a bit later, but I would just say to you, you should focus very hard on the bits you don't like, because it won't be repealed in toto, but focus very hard on the bits you don't like, and people like Julian and myself will then try to use other acts of Parliament, like the Freedom Bill, to amend it. So that's the way it'll go.